Ding! The final boarding chime trembles through the cabin. Click! The overhead bin snaps shut. A brief whoosh from the vent, then silence. Seat 1A isn't meant for newcomers, dear. A velvety voice hisses from just behind Delilah. Have you ever been forced to give up a seat you earned? Tell me where you're watching from. Her pulse rattles so loud she fears even the engines will hear it. In that instant, time fractures. A flash of her cramped Brooklyn studio. Fluorescent lab lights glaring as she scrubbed coffee mugs at 2 a.m. A glimpse of investors' polite nods, then polite dismissals when she pitched Sky Vista's earliest drug trials. A blur of her first taste of success, the day she signed a $5 million seed round from a skeptic turned advocate. Back in 1A, Delilah's fingers grip the soft leather armrest. Around her, champagne flutes hang suspended, silken shawls freeze mid-drape, and even the engine's purr seems to hush, awaiting her next move. She inhales the rich aroma of single-origin Arabica drifting from the service cart. Tonight's charter flight out of Teterboro is meant to be her oasis, a private cabin of 6 VIPs headed to Geneva for the $50 million Series C pitch. Instead, it's become a cage of expectation and entitlement. The flight attendant steps forward, pressed collar immaculate, tablet glowing with her name. Delilah Morgan, 1A. He clears his throat. Ms. Morgan, I'm sorry, but Mrs. Whitman in 1B has requested that you relocate to 3A. Would that be possible? Delilah lifts her boarding pass, steadying her voice. My reservation clearly shows seat 1A. I paid for this spot. He glances at the screen, hesitates. Of course, ma'am. I'll confirm with the flight manager. He drifts away, leaving a charged hush in his wake. She closes her eyes for a heartbeat. Every late night, every closed door led me here. The flight manager arrives. A picture of corporate grace, clipboard in hand. Ms. Morgan, our Platinum Elite Charter members expect consistency. Mrs. Whitman has been with us for decades. If you'd consider 3A, also first class, it would smooth things over. Delilah's jaw tightens. 7 rows back, she imagines the hum of forced apologies, the flutter of uncomfortable glances as she fumbles her prep deck. She pictures investors' skeptical eyebrows. My seat is 1A, she replies calmly. If needed, I can show my confirmation email. Behind them, Mrs. Whitman lounges in 1B, silk scarf, diamond cuff, a platinum card glinting at her wrist. At her side, Linda Simmons offers Delilah a patronizing smile, as though to say, step aside. Murmurs ripple. It's only one seat. Why make waves now? Delilah senses every doubt, every assumption that a young black woman should yield to long-established privilege. But Delilah Morgan is no shrinking violet. She thinks back to her mother's voice. You've earned every inch of your place. Never let anyone make you doubt it. Reaching into her purse, she retrieves her phone. The display shows one contact at the top, Charles Bennett, CFO, a friend who stood by her through every no. She taps his name. The cabin holds its breath. A single ring, then Charles's calm baritone. Delilah, activate Protocol Alpha 1, she says, voice low but firm. Ground the charter fleet. Freeze the $120 million maintenance fund. Redirect it to our community health initiative, effective immediately. Flash. A tablet screen in the galley flickers red. Grounded. Shock ricochets through first class. Champagne settles with a soft clink. The flight manager's polite mask falters. Mrs. Whitman's trap of entitlement snaps shut. Her breath catches. Linda Simmons's tight smile crumbles. Footsteps click against carpet. 2 figures in tailored Navy suits emerge. Robert Hale, Director of Charter Operations, face unreadable, and Christine Park, Head of Service Quality Control, eyes steely with purpose. They stride down the aisle like arbiters of justice. Robert raises a hand. His voice rings with authority. Ladies and gentlemen, By directive of SkyVista Biopharma's executive office, this charter fleet is grounded mid-flight. All maintenance funds are frozen and will be reallocated to underfunded community clinics. Gasp after gasps. The flight manager stammers. But this is unprecedented. Delilah allows herself a small, serene smile. She sinks into 1A, the leather cradling her like a triumph. There's no gloating here, only the quiet power of integrity upheld. Christine Park turns to Delilah. We apologize for the inconvenience, Ms. Morgan. Thank you for your patience. Across the cabin, a business traveler lifts his glass in salute. An elderly couple nods with respect. The atmosphere shifts from tension to admiration. Delilah closes her eyes, feeling a steady warmth bloom in her chest. The engine's hum returns, stronger now, as if bolstered by the truth of her resolve. A voice crackles overhead. Ladies and gentlemen, we apologize for the delay. We'll update you shortly. Delilah brushes a finger over the embossed SkyVista logo on her purse clasp. She's no longer an underdog begging for a seat. She's the author of her own worth, proof that one calm call can reshape an entire sky. And somewhere beyond the cockpit door, the world is watching. Delilah Morgan sank into her seatbelt and watched the cabin lights dim as the engines throttled up. She felt the rumble of power beneath her, not just the jet's thrust, but the momentum of her own journey rushing through her veins. At 45, she had become CEO of SkyVista Biopharma, transforming a scrappy lab startup into a serious contender in immunotherapy. She'd come a long way from that 10x10 Brooklyn studio, where she mixed cell cultures at midnight and scrubbed coffee mugs to keep the lights on. Out the window, the gray tarmac of Teterboro slipped beneath the wing, merging into a blur of yellow taxiway lines and distant terminal lights. Beyond that, just hours away, lay Geneva's gilded conference halls and the promises of a $50 million Series C raise. This flight was her final private moment to steel herself. No crowded terminals, no idle chatter, only a small circle of VIPs and the quiet hum of anticipation. She unfolded her tablet and thumbed through key slides, projected revenue curves, phased trial results, risk mitigation strategies. Her investors needed numbers, but more than that, they needed a story, a narrative of grit, innovation, and unwavering purpose. Delilah tapped the screen, making a mental note to emphasize the patient impact metrics. Our lead candidate improved remission rates by 35% in under 6 months. Those statistics weren't just bullet points. They represented real lives touched, families given hope. A soft chime drew her attention. Her phone's screen lit up with a heartbeat. An incoming text from her executive assistant, Marisol. Geneva Logistics confirmed. You're on at 9 a.m. sharp in Hall B. All materials are digital. Travel time built in. She offered a small smile. Marisol had been with her since the Series A days, anticipating every need before Delilah even voiced it. Their partnership was a testament to loyalty earned, not purchased. Delilah tucked the tablet into her leather portfolio and let her gaze drift to the other passengers. A handful of older executives in tailored suits chatted quietly, adjusting cufflinks and comparing itinerary notes. A pair of venture partners whispered over a shared portfolio, nodding at an infographic flashing on a miniature screen. Delilah recognized faces she'd met on the national circuit. One of the investors who'd once told her politely that her pitch was impressive, but maybe not the right fit. They'd forgotten her name, until now. She felt a familiar mix of pride and nerves. Pride in how far she'd come. Nerves because the stakes had never been higher. Securing the Series C would bankroll the next stage of her company's pipeline, enabling expanded clinical trials, a broader talent search, and the chance to license technology for global distribution. It would mean delivering on every vow she'd made to patients waiting for breakthrough treatments. A memory surfaced. The night she'd called her mother after closing the $5 million seed round. Her voice had trembled as she read the confirmation email aloud, tears spilling as Mom cheered over the phone. That was early on, when Delilah still doubted herself. Tonight, she was more certain than ever of her purpose. The cabin's light softened further, casting a warm glow across the rows. The flight attendant reappeared with a silver tray, 2 stemmed glasses of aged Merlot. Delilah accepted one, inhaling the oaky aroma. "Red?" he asked. She nodded, fingers curling around the glass's stem. Each sip soothed her, infusing calm confidence. As she raised the wine to her lips, she caught a glimpse of her reflection in the window. Poised posture, tailored charcoal suit, a single strand of hair artfully loose. The woman in that reflection had endured job rejections, boardroom condescension, and long stretches of financial uncertainty. She'd built this company with a mix of scientific rigor and ceaseless hustle. She had earned this moment. The pilot's voice crackled through the intercom, rich and composed. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be airborne shortly. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened." The flare of reassurance in his tone made Delilah feel like part of a shared adventure. Few moments in business were as thrilling as takeoff itself. She felt that thrill now, an undercurrent of anticipation for what lay ahead both in the skies and in the summit halls of Switzerland. Feet secure, she loosened the knot of a silk scarf, a token from last year's investor gala. It had been a gift, a symbol of goodwill, but in her mind it carried a deeper message. That kindness and respect moved in 2 directions. Tonight, she wore it as a reminder that her fight for fairness and equity extended beyond boardrooms into every social sphere she inhabited, even this cabin. A gentle click announced that her neighbor had settled in. Delilah turned briefly and offered a polite nod to a distinguished gentleman in a dark blue suit. He returned the nod, brows arched in quiet approval. She returned to her tablet, scrolling one last time through her opening remarks. "Good morning, esteemed partners," she would begin. "Thank you for believing in our vision of accessible, life-changing therapies." She tapped an annotation. Bold, that word, accessible. Accessibility was her crusade, making cutting-edge treatments affordable for communities that often fell through the cracks. That mission was why the $120 million maintenance fund had been repurposed tonight, to jumpstart mobile clinics and rural outreach programs back home. A small surprise investors would learn in the days after her pitch, a demonstration of her commitment to social impact. The engines roared to life as they began the roll toward the runway. Delilah felt the subtle tilt as the plane lifted, the ground receding beneath her. She gripped the armrests for a heartbeat, then released, letting a surge of excitement course through her. This ascent mirrored her career's trajectory. Slow at first, then gathering momentum, finally breaking free of any limitations imposed by others. Her mind flickered back to the smooth voice from earlier, Mrs. Whitman's whispered admonition to move seats. She allowed herself a private smile. That moment, though fraught with indignity, had been the catalyst for change. It had revealed that privilege was most vulnerable when confronted with unwavering conviction. Tonight, Delilah was both the innovator and the disruptor. The seatbelt sign clicked off. The Merlot glass rested gently on the fold-down tray. Delilah folded her hands in her lap, heart steady, and exhaled softly. Ahead lay a crossing of hemispheres, a meeting of minds, and the promise of new partnerships that could change the face of medicine. She tapped the tablet back on and reviewed the final slide. A graphic of a mobile clinic wrapped in the Sky Vista emblem, bright arrows pointing toward underserved towns. She envisioned those trucks on dusty roads, clinicians delivering care to patients who once had none. That future hinged on the success of this pitch, and she would make every second count. As she bookmarked the slide, the flight attendant returned with a soft smile. "Can I get you anything else, Ms. Morgan?" Delilah looked up, gratitude in her eyes. "No, thank you. This is perfect." He dipped his head and moved on. She returned her gaze to the window, where the night sky stretched endlessly. She imagined the stars they would soon pass, distant yet steadfast, like her own guiding purpose. In the hush of the cabin, Delilah allowed herself one more private moment of reflection. The long nights in the lab, the hesitant first investors, the moments of doubt erased by perseverance. All of it had converged into this airborne crucible. She was not alone up here. She carried with her the hopes of colleagues, the trust of patients, and the legacy of every woman who dared to break ceilings before her. She tapped the screen to begin her walkthrough of slides, each image previewed in turn. Then she paused and pressed her palm to the SkyVista logo embossed on her portfolio. A silent vow passed between her and that silver emblem. No matter the obstacles, no matter the voices telling her, "You're out of place," she would rise. The plane leveled, the cabin lights dimmed further, and Delilah Morgan set her eyes on the horizon, vast, open, and filled with possibility. This was her moment to own the narrative, to chart the course for a future where science and compassion flew in tandem. And as the stars winked on outside her window, she began her final rehearsal, voice soft but certain. Good morning, esteemed partners. Today, I invite you to join us in bringing life-saving therapies to every corner of the world. Delilah settled back into her seat as the cabin lights dimmed, the engine's steady drone a reassuring undercurrent beneath her thoughts. She'd just finished a final sweep of her pitch deck, Phase 2 results, market analyses, revenue projections. Each slide a carefully placed stepping stone toward her $50 million Series C raise. Out the window, the tarmac lights of Teterboro melded into a glowing lattice, the evening sky hinting at the journey ahead. For a moment, she allowed herself to savor the quiet confidence of takeoff, until she heard the soft shuffle of polished shoes and that all-too-familiar clearing of a throat. She looked up to see the junior flight attendant hovering at the aisle's edge, tablet in hand and an apologetic crease between his brows. In any other circumstance, she'd have smiled at the courtesy. Tonight, it felt like a threat. "Ms. Morgan," he began, voice low. "I'm sorry to bother you, but Mrs. Whitman in 1B has asked—" Delilah's pulse skipped. Mrs. Whitman, seated just a row behind, was the charter's platinum elite guest. A woman of impeccable pedigree who'd graced every Forbes list for decades. Delilah admired her accomplishments from afar, but not tonight. She took a slow breath. "Yes?" The attendant exhaled, glancing toward 1B before returning his gaze to Delilah. "She's asked if you'd be willing to relocate to seat 3A, also first class. She's been with us for over 30 years, and it would mean a great deal to her." Silence unfurled in the cabin. A few passengers glanced up from their tablets. A pair sipping vintage red wine paused mid-sip. Delilah felt the weight of every eye, as if the circle of trust she'd carved out around herself had suddenly contracted. She reached into her purse, withdrew her boarding pass, and held it before him. The print was crisp, the date stamped in bold. Delilah Morgan, 1A. "I appreciate that, but my boarding pass is accurate," she said, voice steady despite the flutter in her chest. "Seat 1A is the spot I reserved and paid for." He studied the pass, then the tablet, where the same name and seat number glowed. He sheepishly nodded. "Certainly, ma'am. I apologize. I'll let her know." He backed away, and Delilah let out her breath. Her heart still thumped, awareness prickling along her skin. The soft hum of conversation resumed, but its tone had shifted. She imagined the whispers. "Poor girl, doesn't know when to stand down. It's only 7 rows." She closed her eyes, summoning the recollection of her mother's voice. "Every inch you earn is yours to keep, Delilah." Those words had buoyed her through countless nights in that tiny Brooklyn lab, dark except for the single overhead bulb. They'd carried her through job rejections that never mentioned her name, through boardrooms where she was politely interrupted until she leaned back and let others speak. She opened her eyes. The cabin's warm light glinted off the polished wood veneer of the tray table. She took a sip of the bold Merlot that still lingered on her tongue, notes of cherry and leather, a reminder that luxury need not equal deference. A gentle chime signaled the flight manager's arrival. She glided down the aisle in crisp uniform, clipboard held like a shield. "Miss Morgan," she began, tilting her head with practiced poise. "I understand Mrs. Whitman's request may seem unusual. We strive to honor our Platinum Elite members above all. If you would consider 3A for tonight's flight, it would ensure a smoother experience for everyone." Delilah studied her. The manager's eyes were sympathetic, but sympathy in first class often carried a sting of superiority. Delilah glanced at 3A in her mind, 7 rows back, discounting her from this inner sanctum of quiet focus. She'd lose her privacy, her peace. She imagined herself fumbling through slides, the glow of tablet screens on indifferent faces. She set down her wine, folding her hands. "I'm honored by your dedication to Mrs. Whitman, but I booked 1A expressly for the peace and privacy it affords. I'd prefer to remain here." A pause stretched as the flight manager's lips pressed into a thin line. Behind her, the wide shoulders of Mrs. Whitman shifted in 1B, silk scarf catching the cabin light. Delilah caught the flash of those sapphire eyes before they dropped behind dark sunglasses. The air seemed to pulse. Even the steady hum of the ventilation system felt amplified. Delilah swallowed the dry lump in her throat. Her name was being tested against decades of old money expectations. She felt small and vast all at once, small in the face of entrenched privilege, vast in the reach of her own conviction. She reminded herself, this was not personal. It was principle. She'd built Sky Vista Biopharma on a foundation of integrity, on the belief that scientific breakthroughs belong to humanity, not just to well-heeled investors. If she faltered now, she'd be conceding that privilege trumped perseverance. The flight manager adjusted her clipboard, a signal that this conversation was closed. "Very well, Miss Morgan," she said, voice measured. "Your seat is confirmed. Thank you for your understanding." Delilah nodded. "Thank you." The manager offered a tight smile and moved on. The cabin settled back into its gentle rhythm. A few rows ahead, a gentleman in a sharp navy blazer tapped away on his laptop. 2 women further up whispered behind their champagne flutes. Their glances were fleeting, a tapestry of curiosity, judgment, and something else, respect. Delilah exhaled again, this time more slowly. The tension that had knotted her stomach loosened. She took another sip of Merlot, letting the warmth spread from her chest to her fingertips. She pressed a hand to her heart, where her pulse still fluttered. She felt alive. She pulled her portfolio out and refocused on her slides. The first image was a microscope close-up of T cells activating against cancer markers. The second, a bar chart tracking patient responses in early trials. The third, a rendering of a mobile clinic designed to deliver care in remote communities. Each slide spoke to her core mission, that life-changing medicine should be available to whoever needed it, regardless of background or bank account. Across the aisle, Mrs. Whitman settled back, her conversation with Linda Simmons resuming in hushed tones. Delilah caught a snippet. She really thinks she belongs here. Her lips curved into a quiet smile. Yes, she did think so. More than that, she knew it. She glanced at her watch. 15 minutes until they crossed into New York's controlled airspace. After that, over the Atlantic and into darkness, where crews and corporate reps alike would have fewer distractions. She'd have her moment soon enough to call her CFO to activate the next phase of her plan. But for now, she would savor this small victory, standing her ground in the face of refined disdain. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the cabin's murmur wash over her. In her mind's eye, she replayed the flight attendant's hesitant apology, the flight manager's studious nod. Each interaction was a reminder that progress often arrives in small skirmishes before the final victory. Delilah opened her eyes, setting her jaw with resolve. She would not shrink from challenge. She would face it head-on. She lifted her glass in a private salute, sipping once more. The wine was smooth, purposeful. She tapped her tablet, making one last annotation to emphasize clinical efficacy and social impact in her opening remarks. Then she tucked it away, steadied her shoulders, and gazed out at the night sky, vast, unending, and brimming with possibility. Tonight's skirmish had been won. The war for equity and respect, however, was just beginning. And when the time came, she would stand up again, head held high, voice calm, and remind the world exactly why she belonged in 1A. The cabin finally leveled out at cruising altitude, the seatbelt sign dipping its soft amber glow, but Delilah Morgan felt anything but steady. Around her, the low murmur of conversation swelled into a background hum of speculation. A trio of suited executives 2 rows ahead exchanged quick glances. One swept his hand across his throat in a discreet cut, then shrugged as if to say, business as usual. A pair of women in silk scarves leaned close over a shared tablet, their whispered exchange punctuated by heads nodding in silent agreement. Even the usually discreet flight attendants cast more frequent glances toward 1A, their expressions a blend of sympathy and expectation. Delilah took a deliberate breath, reminding herself that this charter cabin was supposed to be her cocoon, an oasis of calm before her critical Series C presentation in Geneva. Instead, it had become a crucible where every ripple of disapproval threatened to boil over into outright hostility. The low click of heels signaled the flight manager, Deborah Lane, reappearing at the head of the aisle. Clipboard in hand, she offered a congenial smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Ms. Morgan," she began smoothly, her voice carrying softly so only those nearest could hear. "I know you firmly declined to move, and I respect your position. I just want to remind you that maintaining a harmonious atmosphere is our top priority. If there's anything, perhaps a complimentary in-flight amenity or an alternate arrangement on our business partner flight tomorrow, we'd be happy to accommodate." Delilah met Deborah's gaze, noting the flicker of calculation in her eyes. It wasn't an apology. It was an offer of compromise framed like a gift. The implication was clear. Yield now, and your inconvenience will be borne by the airline's goodwill. She imagined headlines the next day. SkyVista CEO upset platinum guests. Airline scrambles to pacify. Her hand drifted to the leather surface of her armrest, fingers brushing the embossed SkyVista emblem on her portfolio next to her. "You've earned this," she thought, echoing her mother's mantra. "No free perks or future promises can rewrite your reservation." Yet doubt crept in. What if the cost of standing her ground here rippled into her pitch tomorrow? What if investors learned of this in-flight standoff and questioned her judgment or her ability to navigate high-stakes conflict? She swallowed, tasting the faint bitterness of Merlot still clinging to her palate. In boardrooms, she pivoted and negotiated. But here, inside the bubble of first class, negotiation felt like capitulation. A hush fell briefly as passengers registered Deborah's words. Glasses clinked softly. Someone 2 rows back cleared his throat. Delilah caught his eye and offered a polite nod, but she sensed the unspoken question. Is she making the right call? The unrelenting pressure of the cabin tightened around her shoulders. She closed her eyes, drawing in a quiet moment. In the darkness behind her lids, she saw a flash of her earliest days, the inside of her studio apartment. Walls lined with empty takeout cartons and research notes taped in clusters. She remembered the ache in her joints after marathon pipetting sessions, the sting of early morning messages from potential partners who said they'd get back to her soon, then never did. With each memory came a rush of resolve so potent it set her teeth on edge. She inhaled again and let that resolve wash over her. But the social pressure was relentless. When she opened her eyes, she caught sight of a woman in a tailored navy blazer just ahead of her, arms crossed, lips pressed in a thin line. The woman raised a single eyebrow, her expression betraying polite impatience. Delilah felt a tremor of anger, irritation at being judged by strangers who had no idea of her journey. But she angled her shoulders to the window and focused on the night sky, the distant blur of city lights below. Above the din, she heard the seatbelt sign flick off, but remained motionless. This was more than a simple seating dispute. It was a battleground for principle. She recalled her mother's words again, louder this time. "You didn't climb this mountain to step aside at the peak." She placed a hand over her heart, feeling the steady thump of her pulse. As if on cue, The cabin door near the galley swung open. 2 crew members, Greg Parker, the lead flight attendant, and Deborah's second-in-command, stepped into view. Greg's usually genial face wore a veneer of tension. He avoided direct eye contact. Deborah maintained her practiced composure, but the crease between her brows betrayed worry. They paused at the head of the aisle, their presence a reminder that the airline's chain of command was watching. Greg cleared his throat. His voice, though polite, carried an undercurrent of uncertainty. "Ms. Morgan, Mrs. Whitman has expressed some disappointment. If you'd reconsider..." He trailed off, scanning Delilah's face for a sign of concession. Delilah felt the cabin's collective gaze lock onto her. The fabric of her suit felt too tight, the cabin air too warm. She took a measured breath, letting the calm she'd cultivated in the lab settle her nerves. "I understand Mrs. Whitman's feelings," she said, her tone even. "But I also understand the importance of honoring a valid reservation. I booked seat 1A for a reason tied to my work and responsibilities. I'd appreciate your support in maintaining that arrangement." Her voice sliced through the tension. There was no anger in it, only firmness. The passengers shifted, unsettled by her calm. Whispered ripples rose and fell, some approving, some incredulous. Greg and Deborah exchanged a quick glance, and Delilah detected the flicker of respect behind Greg's eyes. Maybe it was the clarity of her position. Maybe it was the recognition of her quiet strength. Behind her, Mrs. Whitman leaned forward, removing her sunglasses and revealing a flash of icy blue eyes. Delilah met that gaze without flinching. She imagined the count of years on Mrs. Whitman's frequent flyer card, decades of privilege heaped in a single gilded membership. Yet here, equality was non-negotiable. She closed her eyes once more, this time envisioning the ripple effect of her actions. Patients in rural clinics receiving life-saving treatments, mobile health units bearing the Sky Vista emblem rolling into underserved towns. That vision was her North Star. Everything else, the whispers, the offers, the veiled threats, was peripheral. She opened her eyes, lifted her chin, and shifted attention back to her tablet. She tapped on her pitch deck, scrolling to the slide that outlined the community outreach initiatives funded by the reallocated maintenance fund. The slide glowed with images of smiling nurses and patients in bright hallways, a stark counterpoint to the sterile opulence around her. Greg Parker's voice floated down the aisle. "Ms. Morgan, I'll notify Mrs. Whitman of your decision." His tone was respectful, acknowledging the firmness of her stance. He offered her a small nod before turning away. Delilah allowed herself a private smile. It wasn't victory. It was a reminder that conviction could steady even the most fraught skies. She closed her eyes again, savoring the sense of integrity that settled in her chest. Warmer than any Merlot, firmer than any leather. The cabin lights shifted back to their ambient glow. The murmurs softened, and the quiet hum returned, this time laced with a new undercurrent of respect. From her seat 1A, Delilah surveyed the cabin one last time, the trio of executives now leaning forward in interest, the women sharing the tablet, nodding thoughtfully at her unwavering response. Even Mrs. Whitman, who regarded her with a guarded expression rather than disdain. Delilah leaned back, smoothing her charcoal suit jacket. She felt a subtle release of tension, the plateau after a steep ascent. There would be more battles ahead, real ones, in Geneva. But she'd won this round. She reopened her tablet, tapping into her final rehearsal points: patient impact stories, financial forecasts, leadership vision. Then she set it aside, tipped her glass gently in a silent toast to herself, and allowed the plane's movement through the night sky to lull her into a composed anticipation. Tomorrow's spotlight awaited, but for now, Delilah Morgan sat steadfast in 1A, proof that steadfast purpose and quiet strength could weather any storm, even the softest gale of whispered judgment in a first-class cabin. Delilah pressed her palm against the cool leather of her armrest, heart pounding as she listened to the soft, insistent voice at her side. Linda Simmons, a woman whose perfectly coiffed bob and sleek cream blazer spoke of endless charity galas and boardroom influence, leaned in close, her perfume a blend of sandalwood and white tea. "Really, Ms. Morgan," Linda murmured, eyes fixed on Delilah's. "It's just one seat. Why make this personal? Think of the atmosphere, your fellow passengers, the investment partners on board. A concession here would speak volumes about your grace under pressure." The cabin lights overhead glowed amber, turning this chartered sanctuary into a confessional booth of whispered judgments. Delilah's gaze flicked to Mrs. Whitman in 1B, who offered a sympathetic nod. Across the aisle, two venture partners in tailored suits exchanged subtle glances, their expressions a mix of curiosity and mild reproach. Every head seemed poised to lean in, every pair of ears primed for Delilah's next move. She inhaled slowly, letting the rich scent of Arabica coffee drifting from the service cart anchor her. In her mind, she replayed the countless times she'd been told to step aside, in undergraduate lectures when questions from students of color went unanswered, in million-dollar pitch rooms where her name earned only polite applause. Each memory coalesced into a familiar ache. The loneliness of being the only one who looked like her, the sting of feeling invisible. Linda's voice softened further, almost apologetic. "I know you worked hard, truly, but sometimes the smoothest path is the diplomatic one. You have investors to impress, a Series C to close tomorrow morning. Why risk any stray comment or sideways glance? Trust me, this isn't the hill you want to die on." Frustration flared in Delilah's chest. She could feel every syllable as a gentle squeeze, an invitation to sacrifice her dignity for the comfort of the majority. She swallowed, plastic momentarily sealing her throat. The Merlot in her glass sloshed gently as her hand tightened around the stem. A soft clink echoed down the aisle as she set it back on the tray. "Ms. Morgan?" The flight attendant ventured from the aisle, eyes flicking between Linda and Delilah. "Is there anything else I can assist with?" His tone was polite, but uncertainty quivered beneath it, as though he wondered whether he'd need to intercede again. Delilah forced a measured smile and shook her head. "No, thank you." Her voice held calm steadiness, but inside, a quiet storm raged. She felt the pulse of every passenger's expectation. Yield for harmony, conform to unspoken hierarchies, play the part of the accommodating guest. Linda leaned back, as if her work was done, but the air remained taut. The cabin's hush held more weight than any engine roar. Delilah's pulse thundered in her ears. She could almost hear the mechanical click of the seatbelt sign, though it had already gone off. In the soft glow of the accent lights, she traced the edge of her boarding pass, 1A. Its crisp lines a testament to her insistence. She closed her eyes, summoning that reservoir of resolve she'd built over years of lab nights and boardroom battles. She recalled the time she'd spent drafting research proposals in a half-empty apartment, her desk piled high with rejection letters. She remembered the faces of patients who'd reached out after early trials, sharing stories of renewed hope. They looked to her not for placation, but for change. She opened her eyes and swallowed again, her throat raw. "Linda," she said softly, drawing Linda's gaze, "I appreciate your advice, but my work isn't about making people comfortable. It's about challenging the status quo and delivering real impact. If I give up this seat now, I'm sending the wrong message. To every colleague, every patient, every young woman watching this and thinking, maybe I'll just keep my head down." The cabin exhaled as one. She saw empathy flicker in the eyes of the duo by the window, respect dawning in the venture partner's posture. Even the flight attendant's stance shifted, his shoulders relaxing as he took in her calm defiance. Linda's polite smile faltered. She opened her mouth, closed it, then tried again, voice measured. "Of course, Ms. Morgan. I only—" She trailed off, uncertainty creeping into her tone for the first time. Delilah offered a gentle nod, gratitude softening the edges of her resolve. "Thank you," she said. "I'm honored to sit here." A ripple of quiet approval spread through first class. The plush cabin atmosphere, once suffused with tension, lightened imperceptibly. The tray tables glinted under the soft lights. The overhead bins hummed with chilled air. Delilah realized the clashing currents of privilege and principle had reached their peak, and she had stood firm. She lifted her portfolio from the seat back pocket and felt its reassuring weight in her lap. A quick glance at the Sky Vista logo, delicate embossing on matte leather, reminded her of the mission that pulsed beneath every slide of her pitch deck. This wasn't about seats or status. It was about equitable access to life-saving therapies. Behind her, the hum of soft chatter picked up. A gentleman in the aisle seat nudged his companion and nodded toward Delilah, eyebrows raised in respectful acknowledgement. Linda Simmons quietly reshuffled her scarf, her expression a mix of admiration and resignation. Mrs. Whitman tapped a finger against her platinum bracelet, a private gesture of endorsement. Delilah allowed herself a private, subtle smile. She took a deep breath, letting the residual tension drain from her shoulders. The cabin's ambiance shifted to something warmer, an undercurrent of solidarity rather than scrutiny. As the flight manager passed by, she offered Delilah a brief, genuine smile. "Thank you for your understanding and your patience," she whispered, her earlier tension replaced by respect. Delilah inclined her head in acknowledgement. "Thank you for maintaining standards for everyone," she replied. The cabin door to the galley clicked closed behind the flight manager, and Delilah felt the momentum of her victory settle into a steady hum. She picked up her glass of Merlot, savoring the notes of dark cherry and oak, and raised it in a silent toast, to herself and to every quiet act of conviction that had carried her here. Out the window, the night sky shimmered with distant stars, unmoved by human hierarchies. Delilah took another sip, setting the glass gently on the tray. Her gaze drifted back to the cabin, now transformed from a crucible of judgment into a space of shared respect. The real test lay ahead in Geneva's halls, but tonight, she'd shown that true leadership begins with standing firm in your own truth. With that, she leaned back, closing her eyes for a moment, to let the Merlot's warmth and the cabin's newfound calm wash over her. In the hush of first class, Delilah Morgan affirmed her place, not by the title on her boarding pass, but by the quiet strength of her conviction. Delilah sat very still in 1A. The cabin light softened to a mellow glow that felt almost conspiratorial. Around her, the murmured conversations continued, a steady undercurrent of polite intrigue, but she barely registered it. Instead, her attention was consumed by the small boarding pass tucked into her leather portfolio, 1A. She traced the embossed font with her thumb, feeling the tiny ridges beneath her skin. "I earned this," she thought, and let that conviction resonate deep in her chest. Her heart still fluttered from the whispered exchanges of the past hour. The flight attendant's tentative apology, Linda Simmons' gentle coaxing, the flight manager's carefully worded suggestion. Each moment had piled pressure onto her shoulders. Yet here she was, still seated, still unbowed. The hush of first class seemed to hold its breath alongside her. Delilah closed her eyes and let her mind drift to a memory that had sustained her through countless challenges. Her mother's living room, the single lamp glowing over a stack of research journals and bills. She had been 22, bleary-eyed, stirring a pot of coffee as she read rejection emails from potential funders. After one particularly discouraging note, "We appreciate your enthusiasm, but we're going in another direction." Her mother had taken her hand. "You deserve more than this," she'd said quietly. "Remember every late night, every sacrifice, every doubt you've overcome. That's your true worth." Delilah inhaled, the lavender sachet on her pillow sending a faint, calming scent upward. "I deserve more than this." The words echoed through her mind, steadying her nerves. She opened her eyes, focusing on the subtle glow of the tray table's reading lamp. The cabin's ambient hum seemed to soften, as though granting her a moment of clarity. She picked up her phone from her lap, feeling its familiar weight. The screen lit up with a single name at the top of her contacts, Charles Bennett, CFO, SkyVista Biopharma. Her thumb hovered over the green call icon. She could almost hear the mental ledger of pros and cons running through her head. Would this one call jeopardize tomorrow's investors? Could she afford to be seen as uncompromising? A soft chime rang from the galley door. Greg Parker, the lead flight attendant, moving on to another task. Delilah wiped a bead of sweat from her palm and tucked her phone back into her purse. She allowed herself one slow sip of the Merlot that still lingered at the edges of her glass, its rich notes of dark cherry and leather grounding her. The clasp of her portfolio caught her eye. She unfastened it and extracted a slim printout, the final run of show for her Geneva presentation. Each bullet point was annotated in her handwriting. Highlight patient stories first. Emphasize community clinics. Close with call to action. She placed the document on her tray table and smoothed a crease, as though that small gesture could smooth the turmoil inside her. Her gaze drifted upward to the overhead bins, where the gesture of power and control had manifested earlier. Cases tucked away, lines of privilege sealed with a snap. Delilah thought of every time she had been asked to step aside, on campus, in conference rooms, at networking events. Not again, she told herself. Beside her, Linda Simmons shifted in her seat, the soft rustle of silk breaking Delilah's reverie. "If you ever change your mind," Linda whispered, "just know you'll earn more goodwill than most people ever see in a lifetime." Delilah looked at her friend-turned-foil, offering a small, courteous smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I appreciate your concern," she said softly, "but my work and my integrity mean more than goodwill at any cost." Linda's expression flickered. Surprise, then perhaps grudging respect. She nodded once and exhaled, surrendering that particular battle. A subtle shift rippled through the cabin. The tension was no longer singularly focused on Delilah. Passengers returned to their screens and magazines, their whispers fading into thoughtful murmur. Delilah let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Her throat felt raw, but her resolve had never burned more brightly. She reached into her purse again, this time with steady fingers, and removed her phone. The screen glowed, waiting. She tapped Charles Bennett's contact, paused for the heartbeat that bridged hesitation and action, then pressed call. The phone rang once, twice. Around her, the cabin's hush deepened in anticipation. A single ring turned into a momentary stillness before his voice came through, calm and authoritative. "Delilah?" She lifted the phone to her ear, bracing herself for the next step in a plan she had crafted in late-night strategy sessions and boardroom rehearsals. "Charles," she said, her voice low but unyielding. "It's time." Across first class, private screens dimmed as curious eyes turned toward her. Delilah Morgan sat poised in 1A, ready to wield the power of her network, not for retribution, but for the principles that had defined her life's work. In that suspended moment, she felt the full force of history, her mother's quiet encouragement, the countless setbacks she'd transformed into stepping stones, and the unwavering certainty that today she would not back down. She closed her eyes for a second, centering herself in the gravity of her decision. Then she inhaled, exhaled, and prepared to ignite the change she knew the world so desperately needed. Delilah's finger hovered over her phone screen as the cabin's gentle hum wrapped around her like a cocoon. Around her, first-class passengers had settled back into their roles, sipping wine, tapping on tablets, drifting into quiet conversation. Yet she felt every eye on her, as though the cabin itself were waiting for the next move. She glanced once more at the polished wood veneer of the tray table, then steeled herself. This was the moment she'd been building toward, not in anger or spite, but in unwavering principle. She slid her thumb across the screen to call Charles Bennett, SkyVista's CFO and her oldest ally in this fight for fairness. "Charles," she said into the handset, voice low but steady. "I need Protocol Alpha 1 activated. Ground the fleet, freeze the $120 million maintenance fund, and redirect those resources to our community health initiative, now." The cabin dropped into a hush so complete it made her lungs ache. A flight attendant paused mid-aisle with a carafe of coffee. A business traveler stilled at his magazine. Even the engine's hum seemed to falter. She held the phone at her side, listening to Charles's calm reply. "Consider it done, Delilah," he said, authority clear in every syllable. "I'll notify operations and security immediately." As she ended the call, Delilah lowered her phone and let out a breath that had been caught in her throat for hours. Her heart pounded, but not with fear, rather with quiet triumph. She had seized the narrative. She had reframed entitlement as accountability. Moments later, the galley door slid open, and two figures in crisp navy blazers stepped into view. Robert Hale, Director of Charter Operations, and Christine Park, Head of Service Quality Control. Their presence felt electric, a charge in the air that quickened her pulse. They paused at the head of the aisle, every eye following their measured strides. Robert raised one hand for attention. "Ladies and gentlemen," his voice carried easily over the soft murmur, "we've received an urgent directive from SkyVista Biopharma's executive office. Effective immediately, this charter flight is grounded mid-journey. The $120 million maintenance fund is frozen and will be redirected to underfunded community clinics." A ripple of shock swept through first class. The flight manager's composure cracked. Her clipboard clattered softly as she clutched it. Mrs. Whitman in 1B inhaled sharply. Linda Simmons's hand flew to her mouth. Even the most seasoned investors leaned forward, eyes wide. Delilah sank back into 1A, letting the wave of reaction wash over her. She felt a subtle swell of pride, not in having power over others, but in wielding her influence for a greater good. This was the quiet revolution she'd envisioned, privilege repurposed for impact. Beside her, a businesswoman offered a respectful nod. Across the aisle, the venture partners exchanged astonished glances, no longer dissecting Delilah's decision, but acknowledging her courage. The cabin atmosphere shifted from tension to something more profound: solidarity. Christine Park stepped forward, voice softer now. "Ms. Morgan, thank you for your leadership. We apologize for the disruption and appreciate your patience." Delilah met her gaze and inclined her head. "Thank you," she replied, words simple but sincere. "I'm glad we could ensure these resources serve those who need them most." As the corporate reps retreated to coordinate the operational details, the cabin settled into a new rhythm. The hum of conversation returned, threaded with whispers of admiration. The engines resumed their steady drone, but now it sounded like applause beneath her skin. Delilah lifted her Merlot glass in a quiet toast to herself and to everyone who had ever been told to yield. In that fleeting chapter of her journey, she discovered that real power lies not in entitlement, but in the resolve to do what's right, no matter the cost. And as the plane coasted through the night sky, Delilah Morgan sat poised in 1A, ready for whatever came next. The cabin door slid shut behind Robert Hale and Christine Park, leaving a charged hush in their wake. Delilah Morgan settled back into 1A, heart still thrumming from the corporate directive that had grounded the fleet and frozen the $120 million fund. She allowed herself a quiet smile. Her moment of vindication had arrived, but privilege rarely abdicates easily. A sudden flurry of movement drew her eyes. Mrs. Whitman was rising from 1B, the plumed collar of her cashmere coat brushing the headrests. Linda Simmons pressed a gentle hand on her arm, whispering what Delilah could only imagine were pleas for restraint. Mrs. Whitman's sapphire eyes blazed. She planted both hands on the seat back, her voice low and furious. "This is an outrage. I've flown these charters for 30 years. I've personally underwritten maintenance contracts for this fleet. How dare they override that legacy with a publicity stunt?" Her words tumbled into the cabin like a hail of polished stones. The passengers recoiled, glasses clinked nervously, and even the flight crew exchanged glances. Delilah felt a flicker of sympathy. Anger was a raw human reaction, but she remained unmoved, her arms folded across her lap. Linda Simmons reached out, voice urgent. "Margaret, please, please what?" Mrs. Whitman snapped, turning on Linda like a cornered tigress. "I demand to speak to the captain. I want to know which sky-high executive thought it was a good idea to humiliate me in front of my peers." She strode forward, her platinum bracelet chiming softly, and grabbed the flight attendant's shoulder. "You, bring me the captain now." The young attendant hesitated, face tight with discomfort. He opened his mouth, then closed it, torn between protocol and politeness. A stewardess hovered by the galley, clipboard in hand, ready to interject, if only to quell the storm. Delilah inhaled, sensing the cabin's tension spike. She could see familiar judgments flash in the eyes of the investors, a CEO causing a scene. Perhaps she's too volatile. A pang of worry flickered through her resolve, but she anchored herself in that same unwavering truth: fairness over privilege. "Mrs. Whitman," Delilah said, voice calm but firm. "I understand you feel wronged. You've earned your status, no question. But this directive came directly from Sky Vista's board. They have every right to ensure those funds benefit underserved communities." Margaret's glare flickered at Delilah, surprise mingling with fury. "You have no say in this," she spat. "Your friend on the phone? He overstepped his bounds." Delilah held her gaze. "He did his job, and I did mine." A sharp knock at the galley door announced the captain's arrival. His presence loomed in the doorway. Captain's epaulets, crisp uniform, calm authority. He surveyed the scene. Delilah poised in 1A, Mrs. Whitman bristling in 1B, the uneasy flight crew. "Good evening, ma'am," he said to Mrs. Whitman, tone respectful. "I'm Captain Rogers. I'm aware of your concerns. The order to ground the fleet came from Sky Vista's executive office. I'm obligated to comply." Mrs. Whitman's shoulders sagged as if the wind had been knocked from her. She turned to Delilah, lips quivering. "You'll regret this." Delilah offered a steady nod. "Perhaps, but not as much as the communities who'll finally receive those resources." Linda Simmons exhaled, her posture deflating. She cast a look at Delilah, one that blended apology with admiration. Even Mrs. Whitman's glare had softened, if only just enough to hint at grudging respect. Captain Rogers straightened. "Let's all settle in. We'll dispatch a replacement crew shortly and resume our journey when ground clearance is granted." As he left, the cabin exhaled collectively. The engine's hum returned, steadier this time. Investors returned to their tablets, though their eyes flicked back toward Delilah in a new light. The soft glow of the reading lamps illuminated a cabin transformed. The old order had flexed its muscle and seen it yield. Delilah touched the Sky Vista emblem on her portfolio, heart swelling with reluctant triumph. She'd weathered the tempest of entitlement and emerged with her principles intact. The real flight lay ahead, across the Atlantic, into Geneva's spotlight. But tonight, in this suspended moment, she'd proven that quiet conviction could topple even the fiercest displays of power. In 1A, Delilah Morgan allowed herself a single, small smile. The battle was won, and the war for lasting change had just begun. A hush fell over first class as the galley door slid open again. Two figures emerged into the aisle, their navy blazers sharp against the cabin's soft, ambient light. Delilah straightened in 1A, heart thudding. This was the moment her call had summoned. The taller man led the way, Robert Hale, Sky Vista's Director of Charter Operations. His face was composed, but Delilah detected the tension in his broad shoulders. Behind him came Christine Park, Head of Service Quality Control, her eyes sharp and unwavering. Robert paused mid-aisle, lifted a hand for silence, and spoke with crisp authority. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, voice clear and steady, "we have an urgent directive from Sky Vista Biopharma's executive office." A soft gasp rippled through the cabin. Even the engine's steady purr seemed to fade as passengers leaned forward in their seats. Robert continued, "Effective immediately. This entire charter fleet is grounded mid-flight. All maintenance funds, an estimated $120 million, are frozen and will be redirected to underfunded community clinics nationwide. The words landed like thunder. The flight manager's clipboard rattled in her hand. Mrs. Whitman's face drained of color, a flicker of shock crossing her carefully composed features. Linda Simmons pressed her hand to her mouth. Delilah felt a rush of something fierce and triumphant. Not vengeance, for this was accountability, not spite. She watched as investors exchanged astonished glances, their earlier skepticism replaced by grudging respect. A businesswoman near the window closed her tablet and nodded discreetly in Delilah's direction. Christine Park stepped forward, her tone softer but no less firm. "We apologize for the disruption," she said. "Mr. Hale and I will ensure replacement arrangements are made. In the meantime, all services will be honored as promised." A murmur of relief swept through first class. The flight attendant who'd hovered near Delilah earlier gave a small salute before returning to his duties, a newfound respect in his eyes. Delilah sank back into her seat, the leather yielding around her. She pressed a hand against her heart, steadying the proud beat that threatened to overflow. Across the aisle, Mrs. Whitman drew a slow breath, her sapphire eyes meeting Delilah, no longer with contempt, but with something more complex, recognition. Robert Hale offered Delilah a brief nod before turning to the cabin, coordinating with the crew via his in-ear headset. Christine glanced Delilah's way once, then moved toward the flight manager to oversee the operational details. For a moment, the cabin existed in a bubble of stunned calm. No one spoke, each passenger absorbing the shift in power, the silent lesson that privilege did not guarantee impunity. Delilah allowed herself a private smile, savoring the quiet justice of the scene. A soft click announced the flight manager's return. She approached Delilah and lowered her voice. "Thank you for your patience and leadership, Ms. Morgan. You've helped us uphold our commitment to fairness." Delilah inclined her head. "Thank you for acting decisively." As the manager moved on to coordinate with the cockpit, Delilah surveyed the cabin one last time. Glasses lifted in respectful toasts, heads bowed in approbation, and the gentle glow of first class felt transformed, from a fortress of privilege into a forum of accountability. She settled back, the engine's hum deepening as the captain prepared to taxi. Ahead lay skies to cross and negotiations to lead. But right now, high above the world, Delilah Morgan had rewritten the rules in 1A and proved that real power lives in the courage to stand firm and do what's right. The hush in first class settled like a soft blanket after the ripple of applause that followed the announcement. Delilah Morgan sat perfectly still, eyes steady on the galley door. She felt a quiet satisfaction, but also a pang of sympathy for the crew caught in the crossfire of her bold stance. Moments later, the galley door opened again, and two figures emerged. Robert Hale, the Director of Charter Operations, and Christine Park, Head of Service Quality Control. Their entrance felt calibrated to command attention without fanfare. They moved with purpose down the aisle, each step echoing softly against the plush carpet. Robert paused just ahead of the flight manager's station. He offered a curt nod to Deborah Lane and then signaled to Greg Parker, the lead flight attendant. "Ms. Lane, Mr. Parker," he said, voice firm but not unkind. "Please join us for a brief private briefing in the conference room." A collective intake of breath pulsed through the cabin. Passengers paused. A businesswoman's pen hovered over her notepad, a silverware set stilled in mid-placement. Deborah's face flickered with surprise. Greg's practiced composure wavered for a split second. They shared a quick, weighted glance before Deborah straightened her shoulders and Greg squared his jaw. Deborah opened her mouth, then closed it, offering a respectful nod. Greg managed a polite professional smile. "Certainly," Deborah said, her voice level. "Right this way." They stepped past Robert and Christine, their uniforms crisp, their steps measured. Robert opened the door at the back of first class, leading them into the small conference room carved out behind the cockpit. Christine followed, arms folded, clipboard in hand, peering back at the cabin once as if sealing the moment. When the door clicked shut, the cabin exhaled. A soft murmur swept through the rows. Curiosity, relief, lingering respect. Delilah let her shoulders relax for the first time in what felt like hours. The soft glow of the overhead lights returned to its warm, welcoming hue. She lifted her Merlot glass in a small, private toast to Greg and Deborah, two professionals who had been doing their best in an impossible situation. Their exodus underscored the weight of accountability she'd set in motion. It wasn't about punishment. It was about upholding principles. Across the aisle, Mrs. Whitman sat rigidly, her hands clasped so tightly her platinum cuff bracelet had indents in her wrist. She met Delilah's gaze and offered a subdued nod of acknowledgement. No longer the silver-haired queen of the skies, she looked simply like another passenger in a moment of shared humanity. Linda Simmons cleared her throat softly and lowered her voice to Delilah. "You handled that brilliantly," she whispered. "But at what cost to those crew members?" Delilah set her glass down and met Linda's eyes. "It's never easy when rules collide with people," she replied gently. "But if we allow fear of discomfort to override fairness, we're complicit in the very bias we're fighting." Linda nodded, her expression thoughtful. Delilah scanned the cabin. Journalists with silent cameras in their phones. Investors leaning forward as if to catch whispers of the next development. Even a few passengers discreetly sending text messages. The ripple effect of her decision was unfolding in real time. A light chime from the cockpit signaled the next phase of the flight. The captain's voice, calm and authoritative, came through the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience. We'll resume our journey shortly once ground clearance is granted. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened." The Merlot glass felt cool in Delilah's hand as she lifted it again, this time in a silent promise to herself that she would carry the responsibility of her choices with humility and continue to champion justice wherever she went. She settled back into her seat, watching the aisle where Greg and Deborah had vanished. The cabin's hum rose once more, a symphony of whispered conversations, the rustle of silk, the gentle clink of glassware. Delilah closed her eyes briefly, savoring the quiet thrill of purpose fulfilled. In 1A, high above the world, she felt the steady conviction that had brought her here. Not the seat she'd won, but the principles she'd upheld. And as the plane sat poised to move again, she knew her journey was far from over. The conference room door swung open behind the curtain, and Robert Hale stepped back into first class, this time alone. His expression was grave but resolved. He paused at the head of the aisle, clearing his throat to capture every eye. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, voice calm yet carrying across the cabin. "Thank you for your patience during our unscheduled ground stop. I've returned to share the outcome of our review." A hush settled once more. Delilah sat forward in 1A, pulse steady, anticipation coiling in her chest. Across the aisle, investors held their breath. Even Mrs. Whitman in 1B leaned forward, lips parted. Robert continued. "Effective immediately, Flight Manager Deborah Lane and Lead Flight Attendant Greg Parker are suspended from all duties on every charter operation pending further internal disciplinary action. Their conduct fell short of our company's standards of fairness and respect." Murmurs rippled through the cabin. Gregory Parker's practiced professionalism vanished from Deborah's face. She pressed a hand to her clipboard as if bracing herself. Greg Parker met her eyes, nodding once in solidarity, then turned and followed Robert back toward the galley. Delilah felt a quiet pang, compassion for two people caught in the fallout, but unwavering in her conviction that accountability was necessary. She folded her hands neatly in her lap and watched as crew members escorted them away. Robert paused again, letting the weight of that moment sink in, then added, "Furthermore, in recognition of long-standing privilege that contradicts our renewed commitment to equity, Mrs. Margaret Whitman's Platinum Elite status is hereby revoked. We ask that you please disembark at the next available opportunity." Gasps fluttered through the cabin. Mrs. Whitman's shoulders stiffened, her sapphire gaze locked onto Robert with disbelief. Linda Simmons rose to her feet, clutching her friend's arm. Robert met Mrs. Whitman's eyes evenly. Privilege must never override principle. Our policies apply to every passenger, regardless of tenure or membership tier. Mrs. Whitman drew a trembling breath. For a heartbeat, she said nothing, then reached into her handbag, pulled out her platinum card, and let it fall to the floor with a soft thud. The bracelet echoed against the carpet like a dropped gavel. The cabin seemed to exhale. Investors shifted in their seats. An elderly couple exchanged awed glances. The flight attendant who'd first approached Delilah offered a discreet nod of respect. First class, long a fortress of unspoken hierarchy, had witnessed a profound inversion, the highest status card rendered null by a single, just decision. Robert closed his tablet and offered a final respectful bow to the passengers. A replacement crew will be on board shortly. We appreciate your understanding as we realign with our core values. He turned and departed, leaving a charged silence in his wake. A moment later, 2 uniformed officers appeared at the front of the cabin to escort Mrs. Whitman off the aircraft. She rose slowly, dignity mingled with defiance, and stepped into the aisle. The officers guided her toward the door, their professional courtesy a quiet counterpoint to her stunned composure. Delilah Morgan sat back in 1A, the leather embracing her like an accolade. She felt an unexpected swell of humility alongside her satisfaction. This wasn't about triumph over an individual. It was about resetting a culture that had long prized entitlement over equity. Across the cabin, passengers offered small gestures of support. A nod from the businesswoman in row 2, a relieved sigh from the duo on the opposite side, even a shy thumbs up from a young investor who'd watched the entire episode unfold. In those silent affirmations, Delilah sensed the ripple of change taking hold. She closed her eyes briefly, recalling her mother's steady voice. "You've earned every inch of your place." Tonight, her place in 1A had become more than a seat. It had become a symbol of quiet courage and the power of principle. When she opened her eyes, the cabin lights seemed warmer, the hum of conversation gentler. Overhead, the seatbelt sign dimmed, and the engine's purr rose in anticipation of takeoff. Delilah reached for her glass of Merlot, lifting it in a private toast to integrity, then took a slow, satisfying sip. The moment had arrived to resume this journey, across oceans and into boardrooms. But somewhere between those two worlds, Delilah Morgan had already changed the landscape of first class, reminding everyone that true status is not granted by years or dollars, but earned through actions that uphold what's right. And as the plane glided down the runway, carrying its passengers into the night sky, Delilah settled in for the flight ahead, her heart buoyed by the knowledge that justice, once set in motion, carries us all to new heights. The cabin door hissed shut behind the last uniformed officer, and a new kind of quiet settled over first class, a gentler calm, threaded with something like hope. Delilah Morgan touched the soft leather of her armrest and let her gaze drift to the rows of passengers around her. Faces that had once looked on with skepticism now shone with respect. Samantha Park, the head of Service Quality Control, stepped into view, her clipboard tucked under one arm. She paused before Delilah's seat and offered a sincere, unguarded smile. "Ms. Morgan," she began, voice warm. "On behalf of SkyVista Biopharma and our charter partners, I want to apologize for what happened tonight. Your actions forced us to confront bias we didn't even realize lingered in these cabins." Delilah inclined her head. "Thank you," she replied softly. Samantha reached into her pocket and produced a sleek envelope sealed with the SkyVista emblem. "As a gesture of our gratitude, we'd like to offer you 2 years of complimentary first-class travel on any SkyVista charter service. More importantly, we're launching a company-wide overhaul of our crew training, mandatory equity and anti-bias modules, refreshed quarterly. This is just the beginning." A ripple of appreciation swept through the cabin as passengers overheard Samantha. Soft applause broke out. Quiet, respectful, genuine. A businesswoman in row 2 tapped Delilah's shoulder and whispered, "You've changed more than just one flight tonight." Delilah's cheeks warmed as she accepted Samantha's envelope, tucking it into her portfolio. Moments later, the seatbelt sign clicked off and the engine's hum deepened. The cabin resumed its gentle rhythm, but something fundamental had shifted. What was once an unspoken hierarchy of privilege had been supplanted by a new promise that every passenger's dignity would be honored, regardless of age, color, or status. Delilah closed her eyes for a second, letting the gravity of that moment wash over her. She recalled every flash of judgment she'd faced on this flight, the whispered demands, the veiled threats, the pleas to yield for the greater good. None of it had shaken her conviction. Tonight, she'd proven that quiet resolve could recalibrate an entire system. Across the aisle, Mrs. Whitman met Delilah's gaze and offered a small, almost hesitant nod. No words passed between them, but in that nod lay an unspoken admission. Tradition must evolve, and privilege cannot stand unchallenged. Down the cabin, a flight attendant passed by, pausing by Delilah's seat. He gave her a brief salute, a small gesture, but to Delilah, it felt like a medal. The passengers turned their attention to their screens and conversations, yet the energy in the air was different, infused with the possibility of fair treatment for all. Delilah set aside her Merlot and reached for her tablet. She tapped into her email to draft a note to her team back home, announcing the reallocation of those $120 million to fund mobile clinics and rural outreach programs. Her finger hovered over send, and then she pressed it, unleashing a wave of hope that would ripple through communities in need. Above her, the stars wavered outside the oval windows, a reminder that change often starts small, in moments of courage, then expands beyond the bounds we first imagine. Delilah leaned back, allowing herself a quiet smile. She wasn't a hero. She was simply someone who refused to shrink from injustice. As the plane carved its arc across the night sky, Delilah reflected on the journey ahead. Geneva's summit would bring new challenges: boardroom negotiations, market scrutiny, the weight of investor expectations. Yet she felt buoyed by the knowledge that she'd already shifted the course of a powerful institution, that her insistence on fairness had resonated with everyone on board. She tapped her glass to the empty air and whispered, "Here's to every seat we earn, and the power we have when we stand our ground." The engine's steady roar surrounded her, carrying her toward dawn and a world primed for change. In seat 1A, Delilah Morgan closed her eyes and allowed herself to imagine the morning sun breaking over Lake Geneva, ready to witness the next chapter of her mission: to make equitable healthcare and equitable treatment non-negotiable for all. What about you? Have you ever stood up for what's right, even when the odds were stacked against you? Share your story and where you're watching from. We'd love to hear how you've dared to hold your ground.